I got some good news and I got some bad news. The good news, I am the bad news. And in this video, we come about this close to having a complete backseat delete in the DaSlapBox, which is my 2011 Scion XB car audio build. It's not a race car, it's a base car. Basically, we're getting everything from the last video fabricated and functional. But just not quite finished. The amp rack is finished though. It's actually the only thing that got finished because I was waiting on this router to finish, putting the final touches on everything, and then it ended up showing up on the day I installed everything. But like I was way too deep to turn back, you know what I mean? I needed some bass in my life. But everything is built and ready for primer and then either paint or upholstery and being rounded off and all that. Like everything's ready, and right now it's slapping, so we got the most important stuff out of the way. But now onto the progress that we did make. So the floor and the frame are fabricated and they're basically complete and just awaiting being rounded over, the final body working, and then being primed up. But at least now the floor is in one piece, everything's trimmed to the appropriate size, and most importantly, it's finally securely fastened. It's actually mounted to the car. That's an important milestone. Like I said, the amp rack is finished. It got sealed up, painted, got wired up, got 2 sets of LEDs. The amp is mounted. That thing is completely finished. Anything that happens to it after now will be a modification. Big news, the box got Botox. I cut 10 inches out of the inside of the port and then built a 10-inch extension that attaches to the face, which you can see behind me. And we also have fancy new LEDs in the amp rack, under the amp, the face of like the frame, and then under the dash. But we're not really gonna cover too much of that in this video just because I've only been having it for like maybe a week or two now, and I already got some changes I wanna make. So once I get that system finalized, I'm just gonna do a separate video for the whole LED system and like kind of how I put it together. Anyway though, to pick up where we left off in our last adventure, the first thing I had to do was make the driver's side wing piece. I didn't have it in the last video, so I did the same thing I did for the passenger side. I just made a cardboard template using the washer to like get, the general contours, and then transferred that shape to MDF. Once I had the 3 floor pieces cut, I had some help cutting out the amp window. Boom. And then I used the edges of the amp window to clamp on the wing pieces to kind of like pull each side one at a time. And that's how I made the floor one solid piece now. I took some scrap wood and made like 2 braces for the lines in between where the wings connected to the centerpiece. I don't even know if these are really doing anything necessarily, but they make me feel better. In hindsight, I'm thinking that they probably should have went perpendicular, but whatever. Since I had the floor as being one piece, I tried to put it in the car. Ooh, that's not a good sign. Oh, that's not a good sign at all. It's funny because I actually wanted to merge the floor pieces in the car just so that I was, for sure that the fitment that I saw is what I was gonna end up getting. But I ended up just kind of winging it and doing it outside the car, and the floor was just too wide. I didn't even think about that. Maybe if I would have taken the interior panels off, it would have fit, but I don't even think so. I think it was just straight up too wide. I'm like still trying to think, like if I take out the windshield, I ended up cutting like 1/2 inch to 1 inch off of each side of the wing pieces, and that was like just enough to wedge it through. If I do upholstery or something like that, I'll probably want to cut just a little bit more just to give it that room. So here and here, there's scratches. So, hazards of the game, I guess. So yeah, after I trimmed the sides a little bit, I was able to get the floor in. Oh shit. Once I had it in, I wanted to leave like just enough room on the front edge to overhang and be able to fit the LEDs, and then when I use the roundover bit, it'll still look nice and tidy. That's a design element, not a design oversight. For the frame, the first thing I had to do was take out the ugly ass screws that I used. I don't know why I used them. I actually had finished screws. If I just was not paying attention apparently. So I took these ones out, but I'm gonna leave these ones in because they're actually under. But yeah, so I had to take out those screws, and I wanted to cover up the holes and kind of sand them down a little bit because some of them had left, pretty bad craters and whatnot. So I used some finishing screws, and then I also used some L brackets that I really don't think the L brackets did much for me, but they make me feel comfortable. I don't think they're adding much rigidity to it, but in my mind they are, so that's good enough for me. Plus, it wasn't lacking in any way. It seems like they're pretty sturdy. Speaking of sturdy, the whole like frame, false floor, amp rack, platform assembly was not actually like bolted to anything in the car in the last video. Full disclosure, this thing has actually been not mounted here. And if you can see, there's like scratches and stuff. I've had a piece of wood, this piece of wood right there, just like wedging it back. because I'm not exactly sure how I want to mount it, like to the floor. I knew in some kind of way I wanted to use the bar that the back seats had originally been bolted to. I'm actually gonna use these holes right here. The same holes that the seats were bolted to, just drill a hole in the platform, use that to like anchor everything down. So that's kind of what I did. So the platform that the amp rack is mounted to is actually like the most sturdy part. It is like the foundation, and then the frame spreads out the weight, but the frame is actually bolted to the floor and just screwed in right now. And that seems fine. I'm not worried about like slamming on my brakes one day and the floor not stopping, you know what I mean? Like, it seems like everything should be straight. I was actually really lucky that I was still able to use those bolt holes, because the brackets that the holes are in, they were lifted like above this bar and I need them to be under it. So I smashed down with a hammer just to make them like lay a little bit more flat so that my platform would be level. So I'm actually really lucky that I was still able to use those. Before I bolted down the platform though, I cut a strip of Noiko 150 mil that Noiko so graciously supplied me. Shouts out to Noiko. And I put it on the bar. I would have used like some glue or something, but I know for a fact that I'm gonna end up taking this out and upgrading in the future. So instead of having it permanently mounted to the bar, I'm just bolting it to the bar and then having it like a gasketed connection, if that makes sense. That brings us to the amp rack, which is honestly my favorite part of the progress that has been made since the last video, because it's the only part that's actually been finished. It got sealed, it got primed, it got painted, it got cleared, it got some holes drilled for power ground, remote, and VM1. This one's gonna be for the RCA and for the bass knob. It just got a lot of work done. But let me tell you though, that also gave me a shit ton of problems. Not a shit ton, I basically had one problem. Like, they're so bad. They just kept reoccurring, and it was like kicking my ass because that's not really my realm of expertise, you know? Most of the process was really easy. Like sealing up the corners, everything was fine, you know? The primer went on nice. But when I put on the white, it would go on perfect. But then when it had dried, I would have cracks in the corners, like really bad. And it was like only where, is it silicone or whatever, that I used in the corners to seal it, you could see exactly where that stuff was. The paint was a little different. I had to look at it a couple times, like this is made for painting. And that's even what I used last time. I don't know why it gave me so much issues this time. Look at these fucking cracks, dude. Like, terrible. But anyway, I put probably like 4 coats on the whole thing, because at first, instead of just painting the corners, I figured I would just like make sure the whole box just gets an even coat. But towards the end, I ended up deciding I'm basically just gonna lightly dip the paint in there and just barely get the corners. And if it's still cracked, we're just gonna seal this thing up and we'll come back to it at a later date. And that was what ended up doing it. So I did 2 or 3 coats of that, and then finally, I was pretty much just done with it. Like, so I sealed it up. My garage is like way too small to be trying to cut some wood or sand something or do anything like that when I have something in here drying. And for the clear coat, I ended up taking it outside and just letting it dry on my patio. I knew it was gonna happen. It got some little dust specks, which I'm sure I can get later, but like, honestly, I'm not even tripping about it. You really can't see very much of the amp rack at all through the window. You pretty much just see the amp, and you can just tell that there's like a white background behind it. It was a whole bunch of work for a whole little bit of payoff, but once the window gets bigger, there's more amps, there's more stuff in there, it'll make sense. I ended up having to rerun a remote wire because I realized like there was just not enough to do it cleanly without like it being tight somewhere. So I ended up using all of my spare remote wire. So I took apart way more of the car than I needed to, just so I could run it along the back, down through here, and it pops out this way. With the amp rack finally painted and cleared up and everything, I was able to start installing the hardware. I'm floating the amp, so it's mounted on nuts that are on bolts. It's not mounted directly to the floor, you know what I mean? And there's a piece of MDF under it that has some LEDs wrapped around it. And then there's also LEDs wrapped around the top edge of the walls of the amp rack too. So when I installed the amp, I knew I was gonna end up having to cut the mounting hardware, but my stupid ass didn't do that until after I was at the mounting the amp part of the process. And that was a big mistake because it was kind of a bitch to get everything connected in the way that you see it. So when I finally had it that way, I didn't want to undo it. I set the amp down. I didn't have any sockets deep enough to do that, so I was having to do it with the wrench, and I was like, all right, nah, I'm not doing that. So I just cut them. I mean, you see it. I laid down a towel because I was trying to save my paint job from any sparks and whatnot, and the bolts were so hot. Ooh, that motherfucker hot, goddamn. They landed on the paint and I have little bolt threads burnt into the paint. So yeah, after that, after the amp was mounted and everything and the LED system was hooked up, I was able to finally see it in the car with everything installed and lights on and everything. And man, it's such a world of difference, you know? Like it's nothing earth changing as far as like what actually happened in the car, but the vibe is just way different. So LEDs. Before I could get the amp rack actually installed in the car though, I had to finish up the floor and the frame because they still need to be body worked. So first I busted out some filler. I filled in all the gaps, sanded them down, made it smooth. This one I'm proud of because you can see the screw very clearly, but you can't feel that. I got everything pretty much ready. It's not perfect, but it's passing. I also used the Neuco 150 mil, all the plastic in the trunk that the floor was gonna make contact with, just so that like the wood doesn't vibrate against the plastic, more for peace of mind than anything. The last thing I did before reinstalling everything was I cut open the port. And I've been wanting to do it for a minute and I was like kind of skeptical about if it was worth it. And then also like, you know, I didn't know how I was gonna do it. So I ended up just like, skirt. I cut 10 inches out of the port and then made a 10-inch section of port. I'm gonna turn this into a port today. Not today, like right now. About to have it live in front of your face. Like a 10-inch extension that I attached onto the face with a little flange, pretty much to provide a little bit of support and also to help with the seal. It only actually needed like 2, maybe 3 inches more space from the back of the box to the port. If I really wanted to, I could have only cut it out like 2 or 3 inches, but I cut 10 out of the front, added onto the back, and then wood filler. I've never actually used this stuff, so if I use it wrong, that's why. Oh wow, that smells strong. This shit is burning my eyes. And sanded it down, so it's still not like completely smooth, but it's operational, and that's really what I wanted to get to. And that bitch strong. You can actually still see it pretty clearly. I still need to hit the port and the floor and the frame with the router and the roundover bit, and then, you know, make that stuff look pretty. But for right now, it's working. The only reason I haven't done that yet, editing this video. As soon as this one's done, you can be sure that's what I'm in here doing. So the amp rack getting built and the port extension kind of happened at the same time. The night that I had everything done, I was just ready to hear it. So I didn't really care about anything else at that point. I would spend some time talking, but honestly, I just want to go test drive. I just want to go get in this thing. I need to go hear this. So I put it in, and as much as I wanted it to work with the port facing forward, it just kind of sounds better with the port facing backwards, which is why, as you see it, the port's facing backwards now. The night that I installed everything, I installed it with the port facing forward, and it didn't like get windy, you know what I mean? But like, it actually got pretty cold up front, so that was kind of cool. Like, the difference in port noise, that's huge. My port was very windy. As far as the sound, and you could hear the wind moving, but you weren't getting the bass that you wanted. So I think I've pretty much fixed that. I'm not gonna say it's perfect, but like for right now, I mean, I am definitely happy with the results. We don't. You did. Yeah, so on a quick serious note, we all know that feeling, you know, that it's my bass and I want it now. But like, all jokes aside, make sure that if nothing else, even if you're putting it in just for tonight or just for something temporary, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. Make sure those electrical connections are solid and make sure those mounting points are solid. I'm a big proponent of getting some shit done for today as opposed to like having the actual project finished before you start riding around with it. However, there's certain things that like, you know, we need to make sure we're not riding around being dangerous. I say that because this should be right here. So it like slid a little bit. It slid a little bit because I didn't mount the floor. Like I literally just completely forgot to mount the floor whatsoever. I just put the floor in there, set the box on it, and went for it. The box is mounted to the floor, but the floor is not mounted to anything. The LED wire that I had going on the face actually came out. So I don't have any lights in the front right now. Now that was my fault. I forgot to put the screws in, but that's kind of what I'm getting at. It's like when we're in a rush to like just hear how the system sounds, you might be in such a rush that you kind of forget something. An LED connector is not the worst thing in the world, but it's more just the complacency that you kind of want to avoid. Imagine you have to slam on the brakes going 80. You don't want that box to suddenly fly out the front windshield with your head attached to it. You know what I mean? This time it was just the LEDs, but if that was like the power wire for the amp, it would have just been a fuse. You get what I'm saying. So yeah, that's how it sits now. The amp rack is finished. The port, the floor, and the frame are just waiting on this dude, and the box still needs to be permanently mounted. After cruising around with it for like a week or two now, there's like some changes I want to make. I definitely think I improved it by extending the port, but it's kind of also on a scale, you know? Like it's not like across the board I gained a lot. To be honest, I'm still considering flipping it around again and giving it one more shot and doing a straight up back-to-back, like in the same day, listening to the same song at the same volume this way, you know. But like, we'll see. Coming up next, the VM1, still on the way. The LED system update / full introduction, you know. It took quite a bit of work for the LED system. I ended up using a LED kit that's made for your house. So anybody who does this kind of stuff, you know that's not like the hardest thing in the world to modify. But if you don't do that kind of stuff regularly, you might not realize how easy it is to modify. Boom. Anyway, I know this has been kind of a long one, so if you made it all the way to this point, I want to say thank you for being generous with your time and your interest in DaSlapBox. Recently hit 500 subscribers. Nothing monumental there, but still pretty cool to me because that means 505 people have at least somewhat of an interest in seeing DaSlapBox come together. And that's pretty cool to me. For you first 500, like, big thanks to you guys. If you want updates on DaSlapBox kind of like as they happen, follow me on Instagram at DaBadNewz, DaBadNewz. It's spelled the same way as the channel. There's links in the description. It's pretty easy to find. You should go ahead and check that out. You'll catch things kind of like as it happens. There's some like behind the scenes type footage. It's just another way to connect with other bass heads and show off each other's builds and whatnot. Do me a favor, like this one. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the video, or if you have any questions or suggestions. Any hate you got, I guess, you know, why not? Fuck it. And yeah, always see the bad news first. Skirt! Man. Oh, I didn't even mention, like I actually didn't put it in my little script. I ended up putting some Noiko 150 mil in between the subwoofer and the box also. And I know it's not a very good gasket if it's in pieces, but hey, I think it's working and I'm getting better performance, at least subjectively, so I'm gonna call it a win for now.